What if your salary stopped losing value overnight, but everything around you began to change just as fast? What if the money you use to buy food, pay rent, and store your future was no longer controlled by governments, banks, or emergency decisions? Right now, the global economy is under pressure. Inflation quietly erodes purchasing power. Sovereign debt grows faster than productivity. Central banks intervene more often with diminishing effect. At the same time, something else is happening, almost unnoticed. Institutions accumulate Bitcoin. Corporations add it to balance sheets. Entire nations experiment with it as a reserve, not as rebellion, but as insurance. At first, the shift looks harmless. A hedge, a diversification strategy, a niche asset moving in parallel to the traditional system. But systems don't stay parallel forever. As trust weakens in old monetary structures, capital begins to migrate. Slowly, then suddenly, prices react. Wages lag. Markets start measuring value against something that cannot be printed, paused, or adjusted. This doesn't happen in one dramatic collapse. It unfolds through incentives, through risk management, through AI-driven trading systems optimizing for scarcity, through megacorporations adapting faster than governments. Because creates effect. Effect reshapes behavior. And behavior rewires the global economy. The obvious impacts are easy to imagine: volatility, deflation, power shifts. But the real transformation is quieter. It touches how societies plan, how people save, how time itself is valued. Fica comigo nessa simulaco, because what follows isn't just a financial transition. It's a redefinition of economic reality. And it's exactly at this moment that this alternate timeline begins to take shape. If this scenario feels grounded to you, if something here already connects with what you see happening in the global economy, say it quietly in the comments. Even a short reaction helps surface which parts of this alternate economy feel most plausible. And if this kind of long-form simulation matters to you, a simple like tells the system that future predictions and serious economic what-ifs deserve space. Subscribing isn't about numbers here. It's how this growing community stays connected around ideas that most discussions avoid. Now, back to the simulation. Because once Bitcoin begins to move from the margins to the core, the first visible changes don't appear in headlines or policy speeches. They appear in pricing models, in hiring decisions, in how companies manage cash flow. Banks adjust risk. Governments hesitate. AI systems recalibrate incentives faster than human institutions can respond. Nothing looks broken yet, but the foundation is already shifting. And this is where the first years of the timeline quietly begin. In the first years of this timeline, the change feels subtle, almost technical. Bitcoin is not officially declared a replacement, but quietly adopted as a reserve layer by several major economies. Markets react before people do. Asset prices begin to realign around a monetary system with no elasticity. Labor is repriced. Commodities behave differently. Volatility increases. Not because the system is broken, but because it is adjusting to a fixed supply for the first time in generations. For households, daily life becomes more transparent. Savings stop eroding, but mistakes become permanent. There is no rescue through inflation. Every decision carries weight. As months turn into years, traditional banking models weaken. Credit becomes more expensive. Leverage loses its appeal. Millions of workers are pushed, sometimes willingly, sometimes not, into digital, borderless income systems. Freelance economies expand. AI-assisted productivity becomes essential. This journey feels efficient, but unforgiving. Those who adapt early gain momentum. Those who hesitate fall behind, not gradually, but structurally. Governments respond next. At first with caution, then with urgency. Central banks attempt layered solutions, new regulations, parallel digital currencies, revised tax structures, but their influence no longer flows through money creation. It flows through enforcement, data, and access. Megacorporations move faster. They restructure balance sheets, automate aggressively, and align operations with deflationary logic. AI systems optimize decisions without political hesitation. Power does not disappear. It relocates toward energy, infrastructure, and computation. Now I want to go even deeper into this scenario, because over the following decade, the global map begins to change. Nations with abundant energy and technological capacity rise. Debt-dependent states lose relevance. Trade blocs reorganize around hard settlement and measurable productivity. New alliances form, not ideological but functional. This alternate economy produces new superpowers, not defined by borders but by systems. From here, the timeline splits. In one path, scarcity enforces discipline. Waste declines. Long-term thinking returns. Innovation accelerates within constraints. An abundance economy emerges, not built on excess, but on stability and coordination. In the other path, early adopters, corporations, and states consolidate control. Access becomes the real currency. Opportunity narrows. Inequality hardens. The same rules generate radically different outcomes. The hidden truth behind this future is simple. The system itself is neutral. Human decisions are not. When this new order stabilizes, the deepest impact is no longer economic. It is psychological. Work changes meaning. Time horizons extend. Consumption slows. People reassess value, risk, and identity. The collective mindset shifts, either toward preservation and purpose, or towards silent competition. This transformation reveals something uncomfortable. When money stops changing, behavior becomes visible. And just as this reality settles in, another layer begins to surface, one that reshapes not only how society functions, but how humanity understands itself. Comment, that makes sense to me. By years 3 to 7, the shift can no longer be described as technical. It becomes political, corporate, and deeply strategic. Governments realize that Bitcoin is no longer an external variable. It is a structural force. Emergency regulations appear first, framed as consumer protection and financial stability. New taxation layers are introduced, attempting to map old fiscal logic onto a system that was never designed for it. In parallel, central banks accelerate the rollout of state-backed digital currencies, hoping to preserve relevance and control without reopening the door to unchecked money creation. But the response is uneven. Some states adapt pragmatically, integrating Bitcoin into reserves and trade settlement. Others resist, restricting access and pushing capital underground. This divergence creates tension not just between nations, but within them. Compliance becomes a negotiation. Enforcement becomes selective. The idea of monetary sovereignty begins to fracture. Megacorporations, meanwhile, do not debate ideology. They calculate survival. Balance sheets are restructured around hard assets and Bitcoin-denominated reserves. Long-term debt is minimized. Operations are redesigned for efficiency under deflationary pressure. Automation accelerates, not as innovation theater, but as necessity. AI systems replace layers of management, optimizing logistics, pricing, and labor decisions in real time. The journey is cold, precise, and effective. Now I want to go even deeper into this scenario, because as a decade unfolds, power quietly relocates. It no longer sits with institutions that control liquidity. It concentrates around those who control energy production, data flows, and physical infrastructure. Data centers become strategic assets. Energy corridors redefine influence. The global economy reorganizes itself around settlement speed and computational advantage. New blocks emerge, not alliances built on ideology, but networks built on capability. Energy-rich regions gain leverage. Highly automated city-states outperform larger but slower nations. Trade becomes more regional, more deliberate, and less forgiving. This reconfiguration reveals a truth hidden in the background of this future. Scale matters less than efficiency. From this point, two extreme outcomes become visible. In one version of this timeline, discipline produces balance. Capital is allocated carefully. Productivity rises. Waste declines. An abundance economy forms, not driven by excess consumption, but by stability and coordination. In the other version, early movers consolidate power. Access to energy, data, and infrastructure narrows. A concentration economy takes shape, where opportunity depends less on talent and more on position. The same system enables both realities. The difference lies entirely in collective decisions. When this new order stabilizes, the most profound impact is human. Work becomes more intentional, but less forgiving. Long-term thinking replaces short-term survival. People reassess risk, identity, and purpose. The collective mentality shifts, revealing something uncomfortable. When money stops changing, values are exposed. And just as society begins to adapt to that realization, another layer starts to surface, one that challenges not only how people live, but how they define meaning itself. Comment: I'm on this journey too. As the timeline moves deeper into years 7 through 15, the global economy no longer resembles a patched version of the old system. It has been redrawn. Nations once defined by financial influence begin to fade, while those rich in energy, raw materials, and mining capacity rise as new economic centers. Electricity, computation, and physical throughput become more decisive than currency dominance. Debt-heavy states struggle to adapt. Constrained by obligations designed for a world that no longer exists, global trade reorganizes quietly but decisively. Financial leverage loses its central role. Settlement becomes harder, slower, and more deliberate. Every transaction carries weight. Productivity matters again. Not projected productivity, not leverage growth, but real output measured against scarce inputs. Supply chain shorten. Redundancy replaces optimization theater. This reconfiguration is not ideological. It is mechanical. The system rewards what works. Now I want to go even deeper into the scenario, because within this new map, a different kind of power begins to surface. AI-driven economic entities, some state-backed, others corporate, others entirely decentralized, outperform traditional institutions. They are optimized for efficiency, not politics. They allocate capital without sentiment, manage resources without nostalgia, and make decisions at a speed no human system can match. These are the new economic superpowers. Not flags, not borders, systems. Over time, two extreme futures become increasingly visible. In one version, this structure creates balance. Energy is allocated rationally. Innovation compounds. Waste collapses. An abundance economy emerges, not fueled by excess consumption, but by coordination and foresight. Stability allows people to plan decades ahead. In the other version, efficiency hardens into control. Access to energy, data, and infrastructure concentrates. Economic mobility narrows. A concentration economy takes shape, where outcomes depend less on effort and more on position within the system. The same architecture enables both realities. The divergence comes from decisions made quietly, early, and often without public awareness. When this new order stabilizes, the deepest transformation is no longer visible on balance sheets. It unfolds inside people. Work becomes fewer but more consequential. Time regains meaning. Consumption slows. Individuals reassess purpose, risk, and identity in a world where inflation no longer masks mistakes or rewards inertia. A collective mentality forms, one shaped by long horizons and irreversible choices. Behind the scenes of this future, a hidden truth begins to surface. When money becomes stable, human values stop hiding. And as that realization spreads, another layer of this timeline begins to emerge. One that challenges not just how society organizes itself, but what it believes progress actually means. Comment: that makes sense to me. As this alternate economy matures, the passage of time becomes unmistakable. What began as technical adjustments in the early years has now crystallized into lived reality. Over the course of a decade, the consequences of early decisions compound. Bitcoin's fixed supply stops being an abstract principle and becomes a daily constraint shaping budgets, policies, and personal choices. Fiscal discipline is no longer optional. It is enforced silently, transaction by transaction. Now I want to go even deeper into the scenario, because this is where the timeline truly divides. In one future, the system does exactly what its architects once promised. Monetary manipulation fades from relevance. Governments are forced to spend within limits. Long-term planning replaces short-term stimulus. Capital flows toward productive use rather than speculative survival. Innovation slows at first, then accelerates with purpose. Energy is allocated efficiently. Wasteful incentives disappear. Over time, a sustainable, abundant economy takes shape, not defined by excess, but by reliability. People trust that effort today will still matter tomorrow. The impact on the human journey is profound. Decisions regain meaning. Savings represent time stored, not value eroding. Stability becomes the invisible infrastructure of daily life. But there is another version of this same timeline. In it, access becomes everything. Early holders, megacorporations, and states with structural advantages accumulate disproportionate control. Bitcoin itself remains neutral, but the surrounding systems do not. Custody, energy, infrastructure, and regulatory gateways quietly concentrate power. Opportunity narrows. Economic mobility slows. A hyperstratified world emerges, where productivity matters less than proximity to the system's core. The truth hidden behind the promise of neutrality is revealed. Scarcity does not distribute fairness. It amplifies existing positions. When this new order finally stabilizes, the most important transformation is not visible in charts or balance sheets. It unfolds internally. Work becomes fewer, but heavier with consequence. Routine shifts from constant consumption to constant calculation. People reassess purpose in a world where mistakes are permanent and rewards are delayed. A collective mentality forms, shaped by restraint, foresight, and quiet pressure. Some find meaning in this clarity. Others experience it as confinement. Behind the scenes of this future, the real revelation surfaces. The system did not choose abundance or concentration. Humans did, through millions of small decisions made early, when the consequences were still invisible. And as that realization spreads, another question begins to form, one that goes beyond economics and into something far more fundamental. Comment: I'm on this journey too. When this new order finally settles, its deepest impact is no longer measured in markets or productivity charts. It unfolds quietly inside everyday life. Over the years, work stops being a constant reaction to inflation and instability. Survival-driven employment gives way to something more deliberate. Fewer jobs exist purely to keep systems running inefficiently. More effort is directed toward productivity, creativity, and long-term system maintenance. Work becomes less about motion and more about consequence. Savings regain meaning. For the first time in generations, storing value feels like storing time itself. Time horizons stretch. Decisions are made with decades in mind, not quarters. Consumer culture slows, not because people are forced to consume less, but because urgency fades. The pressure to spend before money loses, value disappears. In its place emerges a quieter rhythm, one shaped by planning, restraint, and intention. Now I want to go even deeper into the scenario, because this transformation reshapes identity. In the Bastador's Des Futuro, people begin to reassess who they are when constant economic anxiety is removed. Some discover clarity. Others feel exposed. When money no longer inflates, excuses lose power. Mistakes linger. Rewards take longer. The mental shift is subtle but profound. A collective mentality forms, centered on accountability rather than escape. Along this journey, inequality does not vanish. Opportunity remains uneven. Access to education, infrastructure, and networks still defines outcomes. The truth hidden beneath the promise of stability becomes clearer with time. A stable system does not guarantee a fair one. It only reveals disparities more honestly. This realization forces societies to confront uncomfortable questions they once postponed through monetary expansion. Over time, purpose itself is renegotiated. Without the illusion of endless growth, progress is redefined, not as accumulation, but as alignment, not as speed, but as direction. Some cultures adapt by prioritizing meaning, craftsmanship, and contribution. Others struggle, searching for motivation in a world where urgency no longer drives behavior. And just as humanity begins to adjust to this new internal landscape, another realization starts to surface, one that reframes everything that came before. Because when money stops changing, it is not the economy that becomes rigid. It is the mirror it holds up to human values that becomes impossible to ignore. Comment: that makes sense to me. As this alternate timeline continues to unfold, one conclusion becomes unavoidable. Bitcoin does not arrive as a hero or a villain. It does not rescue the world from its contradictions, nor does it intentionally push it toward collapse. What it does is far more disruptive. It rewrites the rules beneath the system, removing mechanisms humanity relied on to delay consequences. In this new economic reality, time can no longer be diluted. Decisions can no longer be softened by monetary expansion. The impact is subtle, then irreversible. In the early years, this feels like efficiency. Later, it feels like exposure. Governments, institutions, and individuals are all forced into the same constraint: act within limits or be left behind. Over time, the question stops being whether the system works. It clearly does. The deeper question becomes who it works for and under what conditions. Governance matters. Technology matters. But above all, collective choices matter because the system amplifies intent rather than correcting it. Now I want to go even deeper into this final layer, because when money becomes immutable, it begins to shape behavior in unexpected ways. Cooperation becomes more valuable than extraction. Trust becomes measurable. Long-term thinking is no longer optional. At the same time, concentration becomes easier to justify. Efficiency becomes an argument. Control becomes invisible. The same structure that enables liberation can quietly enable consolidation without ever breaking its own rules. This is a hidden tension running beneath the entire journey. Bitcoin does not dictate outcomes. It enforces honesty. And honesty is uncomfortable at scale. When inequality exists, it can no longer be hidden behind inflation. When systems fail, they fail clearly. When progress happens, it compounds slowly, visibly, and unevenly. The truth revealed in the background of this future is simple and unsettling. A harder money does not make humans better. It makes them clearer. As this new order stabilizes, humanity stands at a threshold. Work has changed. Time has changed. Purpose has been questioned. Yet something remains unresolved. If value can no longer be manipulated, if growth can no longer be faked, if scarcity is permanent, then the final variable left is human choice. What societies choose to prioritize, what they choose to protect, what they choose to become. Because in a world where money no longer changes, the next transformation will not be economic. It will be philosophical. And that realization is only beginning to surface. Comment: I'm on this journey too. If you stayed with the simulation until the end, it says something about how seriously you take the future. This channel exists for exactly that reason, to explore what if economy, alternate timelines, future predictions, and deep simulations about where the global economy might actually be heading. If this way of thinking resonates with you, subscribing is simply how you stay connected to these conversations as they continue. If this future made you pause, question, or rethink something, leave a short note in the comments. You can write, "This future really made me think." It helps mark this moment in the journey, and it shows that this kind of analysis matters. And a like here quietly helps this work reach others who are also searching for clarity in uncertain economic futures. There's another simulation waiting that connects directly with everything you've just seen. Click and keep going with me there, because this timeline is only one of many possible paths ahead.